On today's show, the Houston Rockets are reportedly interested in trading for Blazers big man and former Ime Udoka big man Rob Williams. Is this a good deal for the Houston Rockets? What would a deal look like? Possible rotation fit and more, as well as how the Suns Jazz pick swap trade impacts Houston. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on the possibility of the Rockets trading for Rob Williams. What's the most you'd give up in a deal for Rob Williams? What is too much to give up for a potential backup center? Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym, riding out the snowpocalypse here in Houston. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. First and foremost, hope everybody's doing okay with the insane cold front, the snow in Houston. I myself, I lost power and internet for a little while. We're back up and running though, and honestly, kind of convenient because let's face it, I didn't really want to talk about that Pistons game anyways. That was one of the most unserious and unethical basketball games the Houston Rockets have played this entire season. It was a midday game. Those are always really tough on NBA players and their schedules, right? You're all out of sorts because players have a very tight routine that they try to follow, getting a nap in the middle of the day, getting their pregame meals and routines down, all that stuff. Jalen struggled. Alperen Sengun struggled. He let Jalen Duren have whatever he wanted down low. And then Cade Cunningham absolutely exploded in the third quarter. It was a ridiculous game. So look, we'll crumple it up, we'll ball it out, we'll throw out that game because, frankly, this Rockets team has been pretty good about not letting bad games derail them. Now, if some of the bad habits from that game start to follow them, then we will revisit and tackle it and talk about it. But let's just crumple that one up, throw it out, and they've got a couple big matchups coming up against the Cleveland Cavaliers, a back-to-back test against the Cavaliers, so a good chance to right the ship for this Rockets squad. They've also not lost 3 consecutive games yet this season, so there's a chance for this to happen the first time here if they lose 2 in a row to the Cleveland Cavaliers, so we'll see how they bounce back from the Pistons' loss. Also, quick shout-out to Jalen Green. Did struggle against the Pistons, only finished with, 19 points, 8 of 21 shooting, had the 5 turnovers, which were kind of brutal in that game, but coming off winning Player of the Week, the second Rocket to win Player of the Week this season. Alperen Sengun doing it earlier this campaign. Jalen Green winning it for his performances last week, where he averaged pretty much right at about 30 points a game, led the Rockets to a 3-1 record. Congrats to Jalen Green. I believe it's the second Player of the Week award selection in his career. So good honor for him, good representation for this Rockets team and kind of the run that they've been on as of late. But let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode, as the Houston Rockets are reportedly interested in trading for Blazers big man and former Ime Udoka and Boston Celtics big man Rob Williams. Now, first, I want to say this is a trade target that we've long considered for the Houston Rockets to pursue, to look at going after, mainly because of the existing relationship with Ime Udoka. In fact, after the Rockets played the Blazers the other night, as they ended their little 3-game roadie, Ime and Rob, caught up for a little bit after the game. You can see it on the cameras, and you have to imagine that Ime Udoka was over there telling him, "Hey, man, don't worry, I'm gonna get you out of there. I'll get you rescued. We'll get you back into a winning situation." Look, Rob Williams, incredibly talented big man, and is definitely kind of wasting away with the Portland Trailblazers. Health has been the main barrier to his success, and it's probably why we haven't seen anybody make a move for him to this point, but he's been healthy. He's been impactful in the minutes that he's been given, as impactful as one can be on a bad Blazers team, but he's still a very good, high-quality player, and a player that a lot of teams are probably going to be lining up to try and procure the services of. So that's what we're going to kind of get into in today's episode is what would a deal look like for Rob Williams? What is too much to give up in a trade for a backup center, potentially a tertiary center, depending on what happens with Steven Adams? That's another wrinkle to consider, is how does potentially acquiring Rob Williams impact the future of Steven Adams? How does it impact his minutes in the Rockets rotation? All of that good stuff. But on the surface, just my initial reaction to this news is, hell yeah, like Robert Williams is a fantastic big, and he would give the Rockets yet another different look at the 5 spot. That's what Steven Adams brought to this Rockets team. And yes, it was a little slow going earlier in the season as Steven Adams was kind of working himself back into game shape and getting his feet under him and all that stuff. And now Adams looks incredible. Adams looks awesome, and the Rockets flat out crushed the minutes where Adams is on the floor. And adding yet another big like Rob Williams to this Rockets kind of big man brigade in the game for the games and for the matchups where Steven Adams isn't suited to handle things, right? Rob Williams is a very different big stylistically than Steven Adams, right? He's a excellent defensive piece, very switchy, can move out to the perimeter, got great length. He's a great energy guy, plays with a lot of speed, can definitely bring some of the physicality, but he's just a very different big stylistically than both Alperen, Sengun, and Steven Adams. And I think that would be a great benefit for this Rockets team to be able to pick up yet another big man at the cost of the other big currently riding the pine, Jock Landale. We'll get more into that and what trades could look like here in just a second. But I think it makes a lot of sense depending on the cost. And that's going to be the biggest thing, is if you get into a bidding war over the services of a backup big man, it not worth it at that point. So depending on how many other suitors are lining up to take Rob Williams off the hands of the Blazers, maybe it makes sense. Maybe it's a good trade for the Rockets. We don't know yet. We just know that the Rockets are interested. It makes sense. There's the prior existing relationship with Ime Udoka, and that's what we're going to get into in this next segment. What would it cost for the Rockets to trade for Rob Williams? What is too much to give up for Rob Williams, and how would it impact the Houston Rockets rotation? What would it impact, or what would be the impact on Steven Adams going forward with this Rockets team? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, I love going to live events. It's the absolute best, right? Whether it's going to a basketball game or a concert or the theater or a comedy club. One of my favorite memories was actually going to a concert last year, and I actually bought the tickets on Game Time. The energy, the excitement, it was a truly unforgettable experience. Now, Game Time's made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different ticketing offers. Recently, I was looking for some tickets for a Rockets game, coming up, here the end of this month. Actually, it was tickets for the Cavs game, and then I wound up not being able to get the right seats or enough seats together, so now I'm looking at games in February. But on Game Time, with Game Time, there were a ton of amazing deals. Didn't find the one that worked for me for this specific game, but I've already found a couple good offers for a couple games a little bit later on in February. But you can even see the view from your seat before you buy. The super deal, super impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. They're fully transparent. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with a Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so what would a Rockets trade for Rob Williams ultimately look like First, let's take a look at what Rob Williams is making, his contract situation. He's making $12.4 million this season, and he's got one more year on his contract for next year, $13.3 million. So, honestly, really friendly kind of team contract for, what you would hope to be a very serviceable backup big. Again, the injury history, the injury risk with Rob Williams is a little bit of a damper on his potential availability down the line, and that's definitely something you want to consider. And I'm sure there are some of those concerns for any potential trade partners with the Blazers as it relates to the cost of acquiring Rob Williams. But you start looking at what the Houston Rockets could ultimately offer the Blazers. It sounds like, based on the reports, that the Rockets are dangling the non-guaranteed contract of one Jock Landale in these trade negotiations, and it makes sense. And look, very unfortunately, those Jock Landale minutes against the Pistons were... they were a doozy, man. It's tough going from how good Steven Adams has been in the Rockets rotation and how good Jabari Smith Jr. was as the backup five to some of these minutes from Jock Landale. And look, Jock's had a couple good games, a couple good moments here and there in his brief stint with the Rockets, but he's basically a living, walking, breathing, traded player exception at this point with his contract. He has no role in the Rockets rotation. Honestly, probably shouldn't have even got minutes the other night against the Pistons, but they needed to throw some size out there dealing with Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, and Ime didn't want to go with Jeff Green, so we saw some Jock Landale minutes, and they weren't pretty. At this point, sounds like they're dangling Jock Landale's contract. It would also take a little bit more than just Jock Landale. You'd imagine that they'd probably have to throw in Jayshawn Tate and his expiring deal as well in order to fully facilitate. The other option that they could include would be Aaron Holiday. However, it feels like Aaron Holiday is more of a staple part of the Rockets rotation right now. Jayshawn Tate's been more of that injury insurance kind of piece to this point. Look, still no timetable on the return for Jabari Smith Jr. We haven't gotten a medical update on him. Originally, the timetable was a month to 2 months absence, and shout out to Jayshawn Tate, who's been awesome filling in that gap of time for Jabari Smith Jr. And even with Tari Eason out and missing games as well, and Amin Thompson missing some time, Jayshawn Tate has been a consummate pro. He's been awesome for this Rockets team, but he's not a part of the consistent 9 to 10 man rotation. Aaron Holiday is, and even if Aaron Holiday isn't going to be a part of that rotation once everybody is truly healthy on the roster, that means, Cam Whitmore is getting the backup guard minutes, you stagger Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet, and you're giving the rest of the backup minutes to some combination of Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., assuming Amin Thompson stays in the starting lineup, and then Steven Adams and quite possibly Rob Williams as another backup big candidate. There's just not going to really be a role for Jayshawn Tate. It's great having those injury insurance guys available to tap when injuries do happen, but I don't think that can be an exclusive reason to not move forward with a possible trade. So the framework you're looking at if you're the Rockets is probably Jock Landale, Jayshawn Tate, both of which essentially expiring contracts coming off the books. Trade those for Rob Williams. And then here's where I would put a hard stop on no first round picks. It's as simple as that. You're trading for a backup big. You already have a very serviceable backup big in Steven Adams, albeit one that's very stylistically different from Rob Williams. There's no reason for the Rockets to forego, even if they use one of their absolute worst first round pick assets, right? Like one from the Mavs down the line or something like that, like a late first. I don't even think that's worth it for Rob Williams at this point. Now, if you can get your hands on Rob Williams for some combination of 2 or 3 second round picks, something like that, maybe some cash considerations, that kind of thing, absolutely no brainer. Knock it out of the park, sign the deal, and give the Rockets a little bit of a three-headed monster at the center position, right? Where you have three very different stylistic bigs to be able to throw out there. And I think that would be incredibly beneficial, especially still with the uncertainty surrounding Jabari Smith Jr., the ability to have another big that you can throw out there to play in a switch everything scheme. And that's probably the biggest reason that the Rockets are interested in Rob Williams is his defensive versatility as a big man. Yes, Alperen Sengun has had a career year on the defensive side of the court. Yes, Steven Adams is playing back into form. Rob Williams would immediately become the Rockets' best big man defender. And in certain lineups, certain permutations, you could actually envision a world where the Rockets would throw out some Alperen Sengun, Rob Williams double big lineups. It would harken back to when Ime Udoka was in Boston running Rob Williams and Al Horford as his starting front court duo. So I think there's a lot of lineup versatility that could be had with Rob Williams as a pickup. As long as he's healthy, I think it'd be a great addition. And he would be more of, I think, something that you could envision as a truly long-term backup piece, as opposed to Steven Adams, who, albeit has been an amazing backup, has fulfilled his role beautifully this season in working his way back from, an absence of year and a half, almost 2 years from playing the game. But at the same time, it does raise some questions about Steven Adams' future, what he wants for his career, and also what the Houston Rockets want in their partnership with Steven Adams. At this point, Adams is an expiring contract. Yes, he's playing some really solid basketball in these backup minutes, but what does Adams want, right? Does he want to pursue a starting role this upcoming offseason? Will he test the market and try and find a situation with another contender out there, with another winning basketball team, where he can either step into a starting caliber role or where he can step into a situation where he will be guaranteed more minutes off the bench? Maybe he doesn't want to be backing up the minutes behind a team's best player in Alperen Sengun, because that means that on any given night, Adams is only getting anywhere from 10, maybe 15 minutes, depending on foul trouble and certain other extenuating circumstances and whatnot. Who knows, right? We don't know Adams' internal motivations. And we also don't know what the Rockets are potentially willing to pay him to stay in Houston. Now, look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. If the Rockets think that they can, sign a new deal with Steven Adams this offseason, if they can extend his current contract, and if they can get him on a relatively team-friendly deal, maybe something akin to what he's making right now, maybe a little less since he's not a starting big anymore, something in MLE kind of range of money. He's making, $12 million this year? $12.6 million this year. If you can retain Steven Adams on a similar contract value to that, or ideally one that's even less than that, like say something like 3 years, $30 million maybe, so he's making like $10 million a year, something in that range, I think it's an absolute no-brainer. You pick up that deal, you do it, and you get to ride off into not the sunset, but you get to move forward with this iteration of Rockets basketball, with Alperen Sengun as your starting big, with Steven Adams as your backup big, and that's a fantastic 1-2 punch at your 5 spot. And Adams gives you that big-bodied center that you're going to need to throw out there situationally against guys where you really want to throw some muscle out there, against guys like Jokic, or against guys like Embiid or Zach Edey, or just, if you want to throw a bruiser, an enforcer out there to change the physicality in a given game. So if the Rockets are able to maintain, Steven Adams long-term, I think that makes sense. They might be, one of the reasons they might be looking at this Rob Williams trade in the first place is because maybe they don't feel like that they can retain Steven Adams. Maybe he feels like he has, experienced a career renaissance, and maybe he wants to be starting somewhere for a legit contender or a playoff team, and he feels like he's going to test the market this season, and the Rockets know that, and they've had internal conversations about it, and it's not that he's slacking off or anything. He's literally right now playing for his next contract, whether that's with the Rockets, whether that's with another team, that he signs with in free agency this offseason. He is playing for his next big deal, probably the last big deal with multiple guaranteed years and whatever that he's going to get in his career, as he's currently sitting at 31 years of age. So these are all factors to consider when you look at why the Rockets are potentially pursuing a Rob Williams trade, what it would ultimately cost them, and at the end of the day, how that would impact their rotation, their lineup, and things moving forward. I will add one more thought here before moving on to our final segment, where we will talk about how the Suns Jazz pick swap trade impacts Houston, the negative and possible positive benefits of that trade. But I wonder if the Rockets are under the assumption or operating under the premise that Steven Adams is not going to return this season, I wonder if it makes sense for them to explore Steven Adams trades ahead of this trade deadline. And if you could recoup like a late first or something for Steven Adams or a handful of second round picks, then maybe you trade Adams and then use the assets that you got from trading Adams to acquire Rob Williams. Now, I'm much more in favor of just getting Rob Williams, period, and then having the three bigs to decide between. And then if you revisit it this offseason, maybe Rob Williams is the future backup big behind Alperen Sengun and they let Steven Adams walk. Maybe they want to re-sign Steven Adams and they still keep Rob Williams going into next trade deadline, and then they figure out the future from there. Maybe they flip Rob Williams next trade deadline after, having him as a rental. Who knows? Or maybe they trade Steven Adams after signing him. Gives you options. But it's also really tough to have that much money locked up to one position. Money to, Alperen Sengun, who'll be making $34 million next season. Adams on any potential new deal that he signs, if he sticks around in Houston, that's, anywhere from 10 to on the upper end, like $15 million a year as a backup big, something like that. And then Rob Williams, who's making $13 million next season. That's way too much money to commit to one position on the basketball court. So I do think it would be at least worth exploring the idea of trading Steven Adams if you're not keeping him long-term, either because he doesn't want to stay long-term or because the Rockets don't necessarily see him as a long-term viable solution or backup five, or they want a different stylistic approach to the backup five. Again, a much more defensively versatile piece in Rob Williams. Trade Steven Adams, recoup the assets, use said assets, plus maybe a little bit more to be able to outbid other teams for Rob Williams' services. Because again, there are going to be a lot of teams out there, a lot of contending teams who are probably lining up to try and trade for Rob Williams, and it's going to be maybe a little bit of a bidding war to see if the Rockets can pull off this deal. I like the idea. I like the idea of Ime Udoka reuniting with Rob Williams. I like the defensive impact and versatility that he'd bring to an already very good defensive squad. And again, he'd be another kind of change up at the 5 spot, if you will, from what Alperen Sengun does provide as a starter. Being able to shift gears and go to what Rob Williams can provide you at that 5 spot would be really difficult for teams to kind of compete with on a night in, night out basis. Curious your thoughts. Do you want to see the Rockets go after Rob Williams? What would you like to see them do? Do you want to see Rob Williams as the future backup big man for this team? Do you want to see them stick with Steven Adams? Do you want to see both of them? Do you think it's not crazy for the Rockets to commit $25 million a year to a backup center duo in place of Alperen Sengun? To back up Alperen Sengun, all that stuff. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Coming up, got to talk about our final topic of the show, how the Phoenix Suns and Utah Jazz pick swap trade impacts the Houston Rockets, both negatively, more than likely negatively, unfortunately, and potentially positive outcome from that trade. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's get to our final topic here with the Phoenix Suns trading their only tradable first-round pick all the way out in the year of our Lord 2031 to Danny Ainge of all people. Look, first off, Danny Ainge does it again. I gotta say, credit where credit's due. Suns are trading their 2031 pick, fully unpredicted, to the Utah Jazz for 3 future first-round picks. And on the surface, you might be like, well, why is Ainge making this trade? 3 picks for 1 pick. That makes no sense. The intrinsic value of that 2031 Suns pick, that is easily one of the best picks on the market right now. And now Danny Ainge and his grubby little hands owns that pick in Utah. And especially the way things have looked and are currently possibly trending for this Phoenix Suns team, that 2031 Phoenix pick is going to be absolutely juicy. TBD on what the draft looks like, all that stuff. But the value in and of itself, that is a tremendously valuable pick. And what Ainge gave up, what the Jazz gave up, are essentially what equates to 3 late first-round draft picks. They're not high-quality picks. They're so-so picks. But first-round picks are first-round picks, and they are the currency that the entire NBA world is built upon. And what this does is it gives the Suns flexibility in how they decide and how they elect to move forward, and ultimately what picks they will be able to ultimately trade in order to improve their roster in the immediate here and now. So right now, as it stands, the Suns were locked into the Stepien rule previously, which meant that they could not trade. You can't trade away picks in consecutive years. You can give away a pick in one year and then swap in the next year and then a pick the next year, all that stuff. And the Suns were like super locked up for all those years. The only pick that they could trade was that 2031 pick, which they just did. Now the Suns are capable of trading a bunch of different picks. They can trade the worst of the Cleveland or Minnesota pick in 2025, the worst pick out of Memphis, Orlando, Phoenix, and Washington in 2026, the worst of Cleveland, Minnesota, Utah in 2027, the worst. Basically, it's like the worst of a bunch of different picks that they have access to over many, many, many years. And so what this means for Phoenix and how it circles back to the Houston Rockets as the team that owns all of or most of Phoenix's future draft capital. It gives the Suns a little bit of wiggle room to improve in the here and now. Now, maybe I don't think this necessarily immediately means, that it points to a Jimmy Butler trade. I don't think it's a guarantee. I think it would point to a Jimmy Butler trade being more likely to happen now than not. But it could just be assets to be able to move some other contracts around, right? Maybe it's to, flesh out the roster at the margins. Maybe they're feeling really good about Nick Richards, and they're feeling really good about kind of probably their best 5-man lineup on the court is going to be, Devin Booker, Dunn, KD, Nick Richards, and at least as it currently stands, Bradley Beal. If they don't trade him, if they do trade Beal and they get Butler, then swap in Butler for that 5-man lineup, what have you. That's the negative for the Houston Rockets, is this trade helps Phoenix in the here and now, giving them a couple more assets and the optionality to make a couple more trades here and there, whether at the margins or whether to swing a big trade for Jimmy Butler, which the last framework that I saw heavily reported on that one was that the Suns would receive Jimmy Butler. The Milwaukee Bucks would receive Bradley Beal. The Miami Heat would receive Chris Middleton. And then there would be a fourth mystery team that would be receiving salary, essentially, to facilitate this trade. And I've even seen the Detroit Pistons mentioned as that team that's likely to step in and help facilitate this deal. And they were heavily linked to being a team to receive Bradley Beal in the first place. So I don't know what it'll ultimately come down to and look like. But essentially, this sucks for the Rockets because it felt like the Suns were in a spot where they could not make any moves, where they were between a rock and a hard place. You had these aging stars. You had a roster that was underperforming this season, and it kind of feels like the Suns pulled a rabbit out of a hat with this trade. And honestly, I got to give a ton of credit to Phoenix for this because, like, the Suns are in a very crappy position, but they're making the best out of a crappy situation. And they're still, look, once you're all in, once your chips are all the way pushed in the middle of the table, if you find a couple other chips like on the casino floor that you can also put, then like do it. There's no reason not to at this point. Like there's no reason to try and like hedge your bets and like, oh, well, we should hold on to that 2031 pick because like, what if it all blows up and what if we're really bad? No, you're already in it. You're already fully committed to what you're doing. Go all in, and because maybe it works, right? Maybe you go all in one more time. Maybe you push in those last couple chips or whatever. I guess it's not all in at that point. You know what I'm saying here. And so I actually really respect this move for the Phoenix Suns, especially when you look at teams like the Lakers and the Warriors right now who are like stuck and too scared to do anything. They're too scared to go further all in and like double down on the teams that they currently have, and they're also too scared to just blow it up and like either trade away their stars or hit the reset button, whatever. They're stuck, and those two teams are stuck in a very brutal Western Conference at the bottom of the conference with aging stars and futures that are not very bright for either organization. So credit to the Suns for at least like trying to figure out a way to make this situation work before it all blows up and goes to hell. Hopefully goes to hell for the Rockets' sake. So that's the negative side of things for the Houston Rockets is the Suns got a little bit more flexibility. They're maybe able to make some moves at the margins, or maybe this helps them facilitate a Butler trade, and then maybe it all works out, right? Maybe the Suns go on like this crazy run and they make it to the Western Conference Finals or the Finals, and you know, maybe they win it all, right? If they're able to really pull things together this season. That's the worst outcome for the Rockets. However, there is a potentially really beneficial outcome here, and that's if it still blows up. Like, here's the thing is now there's maybe even more pressure on the Suns having literally pushed into, you know, their final chip, their final bartering trade piece was that really juicy 2031 pick. Now they don't even have that, right? They've got a handful of crappy firsts to maybe make some, you know, facilitate some moves at the margins, what have you, or swing for a Butler deal. And then once that's it. That's all you've got if you're Phoenix. And if it still doesn't work out at that point, if it blows up, if Butler is added and he's just toxic in the locker room, or if KD demands a trade, or if Booker's like, I'm fed up with the situation, it sucks, get me out of the desert. Any one of those things could happen. There are like multiple different powder kegs waiting to blow if you're watching the Phoenix Suns. And the moment there's even a little bit of smoke and then it leads to some fire and some explosions or whatever, the Rockets are going to be sitting right there with all those Phoenix picks, and they're going to be like, hey, I mean, you want a deal? Like, you know, you're kind of screwed. You don't own any of your draft picks for the next gazillion years. They're going to have to deal with the Rockets if they want to not be stuck in NBA mediocrity for the next, you know, half decade, right? We're looking at an almost like Brooklyn Nets-esque kind of rebuild where, again, the Nets forego way more future assets for aging stars than the Suns did. And the Suns do still have Booker, and he's got value. And again, but the Suns are going to have to basically deal with the Rockets at some point if they want to hit the reset button. So all eyes should be on Phoenix. All eyes should be preying on the Phoenix Suns' downfall. And as we had talked about the other day with the podfather himself, Ben Dubose, it would be incredibly satisfying if you're the Houston Rockets to line up in the bracket with the Phoenix Suns this postseason and to eliminate them as kind of the final farewell and be like, oh, well, not only did we eliminate you, but we also own your pick. So thank you very much for not being good enough to beat us. And if the Rockets could then cement the Suns as a team that did not work out and essentially force the Suns into deciding if they want to rebuild or not from this current iteration of Suns basketball, that would be just chef's kiss, right? Kind of a masterclass in operations by Rafael Stone. Again, there were some people on the fence about kind of kicking the can down the road and banking on another organization's future downfall instead of just holding on to the Nets picks. I really liked the move when it happened, and I like the move even more now. Feels like the Suns are very much in desperation mode at this point. And yeah, maybe they turn things around. Maybe it works out. Maybe they get Jimmy Butler, and it's, you know, I don't know. The West is a bloodbath, and I still don't really like the Suns' chances, even if they do pick up Butler instead of Beal. They've got so many juggernauts that they're going to have to ultimately make it through. And even if they make it through like the rest of the West and they still line up against the Thunder, I think the Thunder are going to wax the Suns, like, personally. So, I don't know. There's some potentially negative side effects from this trade, and it potentially also puts the Rockets in an even stronger negotiating position once it all, or if it all ultimately blows up in the Suns' faces. So with that, curious your thoughts on everything that we discussed in today's episode. Give me your thoughts about Rob Williams. Share your thoughts about the Suns Jazz pick swap and how that impacts the Rockets, the good, the bad, all that stuff. But as always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop the comments while you're there, or just say Go Rockets. Helps us out a ton. Subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate that. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.